Professor Orttung, thank you very much again for accepting us here at the George Washington University and the Sustainability Research Institute. Could you maybe tell us a few words about what is the Sustainability Research Institute and what is your particular research here?
Okay, well, to start off with the Sustainability Research Institute, it's an institute that works across the entire campus. So I work with everybody from engineers to business school to law school to the School of Public Health and social scientists, natural scientists, to put together research projects that deal with big questions of sustainability. So it could be anything from urban sustainability to wildfires to the impacts of climate change on health, a whole range of different topics we look at. And so that job is my day job, and I try and, it's not just my research, but I try and inspire research all across campus and help professors and faculty, staff get the resources they need to do that kind of research. So typically that, in the past at least, that's meant federal grants, but going forward I think we're going to focus more on private grants and other sources of income for. So my research sort of involves all these different topics. So I think of sustainability, for me it's the science of connections, like showing how everything is connected to everything else. And so that's what makes it different from physics, biology, chemistry, or political science, sociology, understanding how everything relates to everything else. And so one of the key areas where I work is in the Arctic, the northern part of the hemisphere. And in particular, I look at green energy transitions. I look at ways of developing cities that can function in these northern climates. And then I have projects on tourism, like over-tourism in some parts of the Arctic. And most recently, projects on mining. So where are we going to get all the minerals that we need to make the green energy transition happen?
What is the particular thing about Arctic cities that make them different in terms of sustainability transition work?
Well, Arctic cities are like all other cities. They have the same properties, like a lot of people living in a relatively small area, and you need to provide transportation, sanitation, all the usual things. But what's different there is that they're in very extreme climate situations. So the climate in the north and the Arctic is changing at least 4 times as fast as the rest of the planet. So you see much quicker changes in terms of temperature and precipitation, that sort of thing. And it's also, those areas are very remote. So transportation cost is a high thing there. So like the prices they have a Subway sandwich shop, just like we have here in Washington, but in Alaska, the prices are at least twice as much. So everything has to be brought in on an airplane or a barge. So that kind of remote location makes it very difficult to live there. And another aspect of the Arctic is there's a strong indigenous community. So the people who used to live on this land, for thousands of years have been living on this land, are still there, but a lot of European settlers and from all over the world really have come to the north and are taking up space, developing it, going for oil and natural gas in the past, and then now more in the future going for lithium and graphite and copper, the other things that we're going to need for the green economy coming up. So understanding the relationship between the indigenous people and the settler community that's coming in is also a key aspect of Arctic life. So resilience and how to keep the cities alive there is a key question because they're facing multiple challenges. And so I was in Alaska this past week. In the past, they've gotten a lot of money from the federal government that supports life up there, because the U.S. government wants to preserve our frontier, wants to keep it populated, and then use that land for resource extraction. But now one of the key challenges is the new administration has decided to cut federal spending. And so all the subsidies that were going up to the north are also going to be on the chopping block. And so they have to figure out how they're going to live more on their own resources than accepting federal subsidies. So that's one big change that's happening. But climate change is another big issue. So there's a lot of permafrost up there. And as the temperature gets warmer, the ice is melting, the permafrost is thawing, so all the infrastructure is collapsing because it doesn't have the support that it had in the past. Indigenous populations are trying to adapt. They want to preserve their traditional lifestyle, their languages, their culture, but they also want to adapt to the modern lifestyle. So they all have, just like everybody else, they have phones, they're on social media. Instead of walking, they might use snow machines now and motorboats and guns, which replace some of the tools they used in the past, but they still want to continue hunting and fishing. And so one of the biggest problems is as you build more mines, the mines create a lot of pollution, which kills the fish in the rivers and the sea and makes it difficult for the animals to migrate in the same ways that they used to. So there's a strong reliance on subsistence living there. And so how the mining, the creation of windmill farms, solar plants, and all that kind of stuff is going to affect the animal life is a very huge concern. So people are very much thinking like in terms of construction of mines. On one hand, that's bringing jobs and income to people who otherwise wouldn't have jobs there. So a lot of the people who live in the villages are now working as drivers for the mines and making an income there. But at the same time, they're very concerned that the pollution that is going to be coming out of the mine, when production starts, is going to kill off all the local wildlife. So how do you make the trade-offs between these two concerns? Wanting to be part of the regular economy, having money, and at the same time living in a subsistence economy. I think that's the real question mark. How are you going to make that? How are you going to make it possible to do both? And what tools can you use to mitigate the environmental damage at the same time that you're providing jobs and income to people there?
Yes. You already mentioned, and I can only agree, that one of the biggest problems that we face at the moment is climate change, is water insecurity, also in many places around the world, due to contamination, natural resource exploitation, but also violence in many instances. Let's say if we focus on the first part, on climate change and water insecurity in these issues, do you think we need more science? Do you think we need to develop more knowledge or create more knowledge in these fields? Do you think we need to study more the technologies and mobilize more technologies or create more innovations? Or do you think we need to engage more stakeholders in this discussion?
Well, the key topic in the North is how to integrate scientific knowledge, that common Western scientific knowledge, with the indigenous knowledge that's existed there for a long time. So indigenous knowledge in this case means understanding weather patterns, understanding where the animals are migrating, understanding how life actually functions in the far north. And so the people who've been living there, it's not a written language that they use, but they've been passing on this knowledge through oral traditions and from one generation to the next generation. So they have a good understanding of how the world has been evolving over time. And then obviously with the Western science, you have a much more sophisticated measurements, I guess you could say, of what's actually happening in terms of temperature, precipitation, and obviously satellite photographs and that sort of thing. So integrating, I think, all these different tools, and then what neither of those forms of knowledge really understands is like what's coming next. And so that's the real trick, because the traditional knowledge can tell you, where things have been in the past, and they can see where the changes are. The routes of the animals are different. The way the weather is interacting, like much stronger storms. There's many more wildfires, even in some of the most remote parts of Alaska. So understanding, like integrating these different kinds of knowledge, I think, and figuring out what kind of technologies, whether it's the old technologies of the past, which were very effective. I mean, people have been living in these most severe conditions. It gets down to negative 50 degrees, and people survive in that, and thrive. So understanding those, technologies and understanding the new technologies and how it all can fit together to help us be more resilient as the climate changes, I think.
Yes.
That's probably the key question.
Throughout the research you are doing, I believe you are also co-creating knowledge with these populations and with these communities.
Right, we're trying, and that's a very
Yeah.
difficult thing to do.
Yes.
So we were just in Alaska, and we organized public meetings so that we could, and we were asking the question, this is what we learned, do we get it right? And so we were trying to present our results to the community and then see what their feedback was. And as usually happens, you know, the things that we're concerned about as researchers often are not exactly what the people living in these communities are concerned about. So one big question for them was, how can you sell art made out of walrus tusks to Europeans? Because in Europe, they have lots of laws preventing people from buying ivory because they want to shut down the illegal trade, you know, where it's massacring elephants in Africa. But what the unintended consequence of that is that it makes it very difficult for the indigenous artists to sell their walrus ivory tusks and the art that they make out of those to European travelers, because the European travelers are prohibited by law from bringing that back into their own countries. And so, obviously, the indigenous groups are not massacring large numbers of animals and then just stealing their tusks and putting them on the black market. When they kill an animal, they use the whole animal for food. It could feed a village. A walrus could feed a village for many weeks. And then, of course, they use the tusks too. So it's a much more sustainable, circular economy. But they feel like they would be more sustainable and more profitable if they were able to sell to all the tourists who come to the region. So that's not the kind of problem I would imagine sitting here in Washington, D.C. and see that that's like a pressing concern. But for the people on the ground, that's one of the main issues that they're dealing with. So they have ways of preserving their culture, making art, and doing that kind of thing, but it's not happening because of these other laws that are aimed at other problems in other parts of the world.
And that is adding to the first thing that you said about the overall interconnections and complexity that characterizes and surrounds these processes. Right. And this sustainability transitions, what we call. And that comes very much in line with my next question, which is about the fact that we see that, and you mentioned also the fact that policies are changing. International and national politics play a great role. Religion, habits, cultures, processes, perceptions also play a very key role. I was wondering, how do you see these forces aiding or abstracting sustainability transitions? Maybe because of polarization of ideologies and things like that. Do you see this more as a threat on building sustainability and community engagement in these communities? Or maybe as an opportunity to move this forward?
Well, it's definitely both a threat and an opportunity. But the funny thing is, you think of the Arctic as being a very remote place, but in fact, it's very much influenced by all the trends that are taking place on the planet. So climate change, first of all, but then economic trends. So as oil and gas, for example, became more valuable, people went to the north to extract the oil and gas, and that had a huge impact on the local economies. Now, as minerals are becoming more valuable, lithium, all those kind of things, people are going to that part of the world to get those minerals, and so that's changing too. And then as the political situation changes, the military is going up there, and now the Arctic is seen as either an area of cooperation where, like, the West and Russia, for example, can work together, and maybe China too, because they have a strong interest in shipping, or it could be an area of confrontation. And so there's lots of papers written about the new Cold War, which would be, military activities in the far north. And so you can see NATO and Sweden, Finland, etc. is getting ready for a confrontation with Russia, and possibly in the northern part of the country too. So all these outside trends have a huge impact on what happens inside the Arctic. And so it's not isolated. Even though it's remote, it's not at all isolated.
We are based here in Washington, D.C. We're at the center of many things that are going on. And, as we mentioned before, things are changing very rapidly. How do you see U.S. role as a world leader as it currently stands? how do you think that our role and our position here and the things that and the decisions that are made are going to help us attain the climate goals?
Well, that's a very timely question because I think everything is changing at the moment. But since the end of World War II, for the last 80 years or so, I think the U.S. has played a big role in shaping the nature of our financial markets and defining which way the world should go. And it hasn't always played a constructive role in terms of climate change. I mean, we obviously depend heavily on oil and gas, and sometimes our leaders support climate change efforts and sometimes they don't. But at the moment we're in a phase where they definitely do not. And I think we're at a time of change, and so the old system is about to collapse. I think what existed is not going to continue on. And it's hopefully a process of creative destruction. Right now we just see the destruction, and we haven't seen what's coming next. So I think I don't think that the Trump administration is going to define the future of the world. I think it's going to be up to the next people who come. His historic mission is destroying everything that exists right now, and he's doing a good job of that. And so I think, but then it's going to be up to the students, up to the faculty, up to everybody, all the other stakeholders, to figure out what kind of world we want to live in and make that world come into reality. But that's going to be a long, difficult process, and I don't know what that's going to look like.
Professor Orttung, you have collected experience and you have conducted research in different parts of the world. And inside for Sustainability, we are trying to really pass across the message that we are all somehow face similar challenges, and we are trying from different perspectives to address this. Do you have any final message in terms of sustainability, the future of our research, the different directions that we are now called to take in terms of our decisions?
Right. I mean, one thing we did in the class at the beginning was do an asset mapping of, like, George Washington University, for example. So I think if you look at the assets that we have in the world, we have lots of knowledge, we have lots of innovative, creative processes and things like that. So I think that we have all the resources and the tools that we need to live in a more sustainable way. Now we need the political will, we need the leadership, we need people to guide that process to make it happen. So I think that's where we're lacking a little bit.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and all the best with your work and your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.